The man on the rooftop had been watching for 11 minutes. Below him, Baghdad moved the way it always moved after midnight, in fragments. A dog. A generator coughing on somewhere in the middle distance. A car with no headlights moving through a side street 3 blocks over. Nothing that looked wrong. Nothing that looked right. Just the city, half asleep, half afraid, doing what it had learned to do under 3 years of occupation and insurgency and sectarian murder. He pressed his earpiece, said nothing, waited. Down in the alley, 4 men in dark kit pressed against a wall, weapons up, breathing slow. The breach team, 30 seconds out from the signal. 1 carrying a charge for the door. 1 carrying a phone scanner that could pull data off a live handset without the owner unlocking it. All 4 had done this more times than they could count. The signal came. They moved. 70 raids, 6 weeks, 1 phone. That number, 70, is what stops military historians when they encounter it. Not 70 operations across a year, spread across a country, executed by a rotating force of thousands. 70 direct action raids in 42 days, by the same unit. Against the most dangerous terrorist network operating anywhere on Earth. The Americans had been hunting Abu Musab al-Zarqawi for 3 years, a $25 million bounty on his head. The NSA, the CIA, Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, the full weight of American military intelligence applied to one man in one country. He had survived all of it, not just survived. He had released propaganda videos. He had appeared on camera, unmasked, firing weapons, speaking to the Muslim world with the calm confidence of a man who believed no one could reach him. And he was right. Until the night, a single SAS team hit a single building in western Baghdad and pulled a phone off a dead man's body. What came off that phone didn't just lead to Zarqawi. It unraveled his entire network from the inside. Every cell, every safe house, every commander, every courier in 6 weeks. And it changed the way the West hunts terrorists forever. This is how it happened. To understand what Task Force Black was walking into in the spring of 2006, you have to understand what Baghdad had become. It had become Zarqawi's experiment. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, born Ahmad Fadil al-Nazil al-Khalele in the Jordanian city of Zarqa in 1966, was not a product of Al-Qaeda's founding generation. He was something different. Something bin Laden hadn't expected and couldn't fully control. A street criminal who found God and war in roughly equal measure. He had gone to Afghanistan. He had run his own camp. He had constructed, by the time American tanks crossed the Iraqi border in 2003, an independent jihadist organization with its own financing, its own recruiting pipeline, its own strategic vision. And that vision diverged from bin Laden's in one fundamental way. Bin Laden wanted to strike America spectacular attacks on Western soil. A humiliation so completed would force American withdrawal from the Muslim world. Zarqawi wanted to start a civil war. His target was not American soldiers. American soldiers were already in Iraq. They were useful, but they were not the point. His real target was Iraq's Shia majority. His strategy, stated with chilling clarity in a letter intercepted by American intelligence in 2004, was to provoke Sunni and Shia into destroying each other at such sustained industrial scale that the country would tear itself apart, and in the chaos, an Al-Qaeda-lined Sunni state would rise from the rubble. By early 2006, it was working. Car bombs in Baghdad were not occasional events. They were operational output, scheduled, coordinated, designed not just to kill but to terrify. Suicide vests were manufactured in workshops and distributed through supply chains. Kidnappings, beheadings, mass executions filmed and distributed as propaganda. Al-Qaeda in Iraq had built what amounted to a terrorist corporation. Logistics, finance, media, operations, all running simultaneously. And then, on the morning of February 22nd, 2006, Zarqawi's men did the thing that brought Iraq to the edge of the abyss. A team dressed as Iraqi security forces entered the Al-Askari Mosque in Samarra, the Golden Dome, one of the holiest sites in Shia Islam, standing for over 1,000 years. They planted their explosives, they walked out, they detonated. The dome collapsed. Within 48 hours, Shia militias were burning Sunni mosques across Iraq. Bodies were appearing in the Tigris. Entire neighborhoods were emptying overnight. Iraq did not fall into full civil war that week, but it came closer than at any point since the invasion. The edge was visible. And Zarqawi had demonstrated that he could push the country to that edge whenever he chose. A $25 million bounty on his head, and he was still making propaganda films in the Iraqi countryside, untouchable. Task Force Black had been running operations in Iraq since 2004. One SAS Sabre squadron, roughly 60 operators, working out of a compound in Baghdad, alongside American counterparts from Delta Force, under the command architecture of JSOC. From the outside, the arrangement was straightforward. The Americans were the main effort. The British were a contributing element. JSOC had the resources, the intelligence architecture, the bureaucratic weight. The SAS had 60 men. But there was a fault line running through the coalition's entire approach to the Zarqawi network, and the SAS commanding officer running Task Force Black had been watching it widen for 18 months. The fault line was time. When JSOC ran a raid in 2004 or 2005, the exploitation process, sorting through the documents and hard drives and phones seized in the building, running them through analytical systems, took days. Sometimes a week or more. In a network like Zarqawi's, a week was an eternity. By the time American analysts had finished processing the intelligence from a raid on an AQI safe house, every phone number in that building had already been used for the last time. The men connected to it had already been warned. They had moved. They had burned their communications. The network had adapted while the intelligence cycle was still catching up. The SAS saw this differently. Their doctrine, refined through Northern Ireland, the Falklands, Oman, and a dozen other conflicts, was built on a single foundational principle. The real product of a direct action raid is not the target. The real product is the intelligence. Every building they entered was treated as an evidence collection event first. Phones into exploitation pouches before the helicopters were called back. Laptops imaged on site. The SIM card tucked into a wallet. The handwritten note in a shirt pocket. All of it prioritized and pushed to analysts before the dust had settled. The SAS measured their exploitation cycle in hours, not days. A captured phone could be on an analyst's screen within 30 minutes of a raid ending. The next lead taking shape, while the assault team was still cleaning weapons. General Stanley McChrystal, commanding JSOC, had been driving toward exactly this model since 2003, the Find Fix Finish Exploit Analyze loop. A continuous operational cycle where the intelligence from each mission fed directly into planning for the next. The British and the Americans were converging on the same concept from different directions. The Americans had the architecture, the British had the doctrine. By early 2006, working in the same compound in Baghdad, they had begun building something greater than either alone could achieve. All they needed was the right entry point into the network. They were about to find it. Before we get to the raid itself, you need to understand what the SAS actually was, not the mythology, the reality. The Special Air Service was founded in the Western Desert in 1941 by David Sterling. A radical idea that small teams of precisely selected men, operating behind enemy lines with maximum surprise, could destroy more enemy capability per man than any conventional force on Earth. He was right. The regiment fought through North Africa and Europe on that principle, was disbanded after the war, reformed in 1950, and spent the next 5 decades being tested continuously in conflicts from the jungles of Malaya to the mountains of Oman to the streets of Belfast. Belfast was the crucible. For over 2 decades, the SAS ran covert operations in Northern Ireland against the Provisional IRA in conditions that were, in several critical respects, harder than anything Iraq presented. Operating in a democratic country with legal oversight and a free press, targeting an enemy deeply embedded in civilian communities with its own sophisticated intelligence apparatus. They couldn't hit hard and move on. Every operation had to be precise, legally defensible, intelligence-driven. And every operation had to generate the intelligence for the next one. Because in a campaign with no conventional front line and no conventional end state, the intelligence cycle was the war. What they developed was not just a set of tactics. It was a complete operating system for counter-network warfare. A system for treating a terrorist organization not as a list of individuals to be eliminated one by one, but as a connected network to be mapped, understood, and dismantled from the inside. By the time Task Force Black arrived in Baghdad, the SAS had been running this system for longer than most of their American counterparts had been in the military. The Americans brought the most powerful intelligence architecture ever assembled. The British brought 20 years of counter-network doctrine. Put together, they had something unprecedented, a machine that could, in theory, run faster than any network could adapt. In the spring of 2006, that theory was about to be tested. The raid was not planned as anything significant, a mid-tier target, a safe house in a district of western Baghdad that signals intelligence had flagged as a probable AQI logistics node. Not a senior commander, not a known bomb maker, a facilitator, someone who moved money, materials, and people between cells. The kind of target Task Force Black was hitting 2 or 3 times a week. The operators went through the brief the same way they always did. Building layout, entry points, known or suspected occupants, exfil routes, rules of engagement. All of it processed and filed into muscle memory. Then a few hours in kit, weapons up, waiting for the helicopters. The insertion came in the early hours. The exact date has never been officially confirmed, though accounts place it in the spring of 2006. The ground element moved through streets empty and dark. The surveillance drone overhead had been watching the target for hours. Nothing had moved in or out since midnight. The assault team stacked up on the door. The signal came. The breach was fast and clean. 2 entry points hit simultaneously. The building was secured in under 90 seconds. 3 men inside. 2 on the floor with their hands out before the operators had cleared the second room. The 3rd man ran. He made it as far as the back of the building before the chase team caught him. There was a short, violent struggle. It ended the way those struggles always ended when a trained SAS operator was involved. The man was dead, and on the floor beside him was a mobile phone. It looked at first glance like every other phone they'd pulled off every other mid-level AQI figure in 2 years of operations. A basic handset, scratched, barely charged. The kind of thing you'd buy from a market stall in any district of Baghdad for $10. The exploitation team picked it up, ran the scanner, started pulling data. What they found stopped them. The contact list alone ran to over 200 entries. Not contacts you'd see on a normal man's phone, family, friends, a doctor's number, a taxi. Operational contacts. Numbers scattered across Baghdad, across Anbar, across Mosul and the Diyala River Valley. The call history showed a web of communication connecting outward to multiple cells simultaneously. A hub, not a spoke. When the analyst cross-referenced the numbers against the NSA's existing signals intelligence database, the screen lit up like a circuit board. Dozens of the numbers were already in the system, known AQI figures whose current locations had been unknown for months. Some were new, but their patterns of communication placed them precisely within the network's architecture. One analyst working the phone that night, according to a later account in Sean Naylor's History of JSOC, reportedly looked up from a screen and said something that everyone in the room already understood. This isn't a phone, this is a directory. By 400, the intelligence had been pushed into the targeting cycle. By noon, the first follow-on target packages were being built. By the following night, the first of them had been hit. The network was open. What happened over the next 6 weeks has no real precedent in modern special operations history. Night after night, sometimes twice in a single night, helicopters lifted off from bases around Baghdad and the surrounding provinces. SAS operators and their American counterparts from Delta Force, working together in the same assault teams, hitting targets across a geographic arc that covered most of central Iraq. Every single target was generated directly from the intelligence taken off the previous one. That was not coincidence. That was the machine. The phone from the first building led to a safe house in the Fallujah suburbs. The assault team went in just before dawn, hitting both entry points simultaneously. The house was occupied. Brief, sharp firefight in the corridor, over in seconds. 2 men dead, 1 captured. And on the kitchen table, a laptop. The laptop was encrypted. But it also contained, in an unprotected folder that someone had apparently forgotten to secure, a logistics spreadsheet. Names, locations. A financial facilitator operating out of Adhamia in North Baghdad, making payments to 3 different bomb-making cells. The facilitator was hit 2 nights later. He was mid-call when the door came in, sitting in a plastic chair with a phone pressed to his ear. In the middle of what the intelligence team later assessed had been a routine coordination call with a senior AQI commander. The call was traced within hours. The commander had been on the targeting list for 14 months. He was captured on the 3rd night. From him came 6 more leads. From those 6 came 11 more. The network was unraveling faster than AQI's warning systems could process what was happening to them. Because here was the thing Zarqawi's commanders were only beginning to understand. The raids were no longer following the old pattern. They were coming every night, before dawn. Sometimes before midnight and before dawn. The gaps the network needed to warn, to move, to adapt, those gaps had been closed. AQI's senior command began issuing emergency instructions. Go dark. Cease all phone communication. Revert entirely to couriers. Destroy any documentation. Change safe houses immediately. For some cells, it was already too late. Their numbers had already been pulled. Their target packages were already sitting in the JSOC planning system, waiting for the next available assault team. There were nights that went wrong. In the 2nd week of the campaign, an assault team hit a target building in the Diyala province that intelligence had assessed as a mid-level logistics node. It wasn't. When the breach team came through the door, they found a forward command post, multiple armed fighters, a position that had clearly been prepared for exactly this kind of attack. The initial breach came under immediate, coordinated fire. The assault team held the building. They fought room to room in the dark for over 30 minutes under sustained fire, while additional elements were lifted in by helicopter. When it was over, the intelligence taken from that building was, according to later accounts by officers involved in the campaign, among the most significant of the entire 6 weeks. A planning document, a cache of phones, and stored on a handset found in the building's back room. A contact that connected to a name the intelligence community had been trying to locate for over a year. The operators came back with wounds that night. They were back on target the following night. By the end of week 4, the number of raids had passed 40. By the end of week 5, it was approaching 60. The network that Zarqawi had spent 3 years building, the compartmentalized, adaptive, ferocious machine that had survived everything the coalition had thrown at it, was hemorrhaging from every seam simultaneously. The compound near Hibhib was a modest structure. A building in a palm grove north of Baghdad, in the Diyala province, the kind of place that blends into 10,000 other buildings across rural Iraq. No markings, no visible security. Nothing that would draw attention from the road. Inside, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was meeting with one of his spiritual advisors. His location, kept secret even from most of his own organization, had been compromised through a chain of intelligence that stretched back 6 weeks to a phone pulled off a dead man in Western Baghdad. The precise path of that intelligence chain has never been fully confirmed in the public record. What is confirmed? In the weeks before June 7, 2006, coalition forces identified a key figure in Zarqawi's inner circle, a spiritual advisor named Sheikh Abd al-Rahman, whose name had surfaced repeatedly during the network exploitation campaign. Abd al-Rahman was placed under surveillance. American intelligence tracked his movements across the Diyala province. On June 7th, he led them to Zarqawi. At 18:15 local time, 2 American F-16 Fighting Falcons approached the compound from the south. Each carried a 500-pound precision-guided bomb. They dropped at almost the same moment. The building was destroyed. Zarqawi survived the initial blast. The concussive force had destroyed his lungs, but had not killed him immediately. When the American ground team reached the site, they found him in the rubble, still breathing. A medic later reported that he was semi-conscious, that he tried to move when they reached him, that he died of his wounds approximately 52 minutes after the strike. 3 years of hunting. $25 million on his head. The full intelligence apparatus of the most powerful military on Earth. In the end, it came down to a phone in a building in western Baghdad. And 60 men who understood exactly what to do with it. 70 raids, 6 weeks. When the full accounting was compiled and briefed to senior American and British commanders, the numbers from those 6 weeks were almost difficult to process. Over 150 significant AQI figures, commanders, bomb makers, financial facilitators, and the operational planners who turned ideology into mass casualty events, had been captured or killed. Safe houses across 4 provinces had been dismantled. AQI's communications infrastructure, the network of phones and couriers that had allowed Zarqawi to coordinate simultaneous attacks across a country the size of California, had been systematically destroyed from the inside. The intelligence generated by those 6 weeks kept feeding operations for months afterward. The targeting list that began with 1 phone in 1 building eventually ran to hundreds of entries. McChrystal later described the campaign in terms he rarely used, the clearest demonstration of what JSOC had been building toward since 2003. The proof that Special Operations Forces, properly integrated with intelligence and running at machine tempo, could dismantle a terrorist network faster than the network could regenerate itself. The British contribution he described as irreplaceable, not because of numbers, 60 men against a network of thousands, but because of what those 60 men brought that no American unit at that point in 2006 had in the same concentrated form. A doctrine, a way of thinking. An institutional reflex, 20 years in the making, for running a network rather than chasing individuals. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was dead. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was not. The organization adapted under new leadership. It absorbed losses, went underground, rebuilt. It survived the American surge of 2007. It re-emerged through the wreckage of the Syrian civil war after 2011, recruiting from the dispossessed and the radicalized, finding new money and new territory. By 2014, under a new name, the Islamic State, it had seized a third of Iraq and Syria and declared a caliphate that shocked the world. Zarqawi's ideas survived him, the sectarian strategy, the use of mass atrocity as a tool of state building, the caliphate ambition, all of it metastasized into something larger and more dangerous than Zarqawi himself had ever managed to create. So it would be dishonest to say that those 6 weeks in the summer of 2006 ended the problem. Nothing in Iraq ended cleanly. But what those 6 weeks demonstrated, what they proved beyond any reasonable military doubt, belongs to every special operations campaign that came after. The find-fix-finish-exploit-analyze loop became the foundational doctrine of JSOC. The integration of signals intelligence with direct action, the compression of the exploitation cycle from weeks to hours. The concept of treating a terrorist network as a connected system rather than a list of names, all of it became formal, written, institutionalized doctrine. The machine that McChrystal built in Iraq ran in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Somalia and Libya and Syria. It is running now in places the public will not know about for years. The conventional military wisdom of early 2006 was that Zarqawi was unreachable, that the network was too adaptive, too deeply protected, too well designed to crack from the outside. 60 British soldiers in a compound in Baghdad looked at that assessment and disagreed, quietly, without press conferences or announcements. They disagreed in planning rooms and in the dark outside target buildings in the Iraqi night. They disagreed by building a method, by running the machine faster than it had ever been run before, by treating every raid not as an endpoint, but as a beginning. And then, on one spring night in 2006, in a building in western Baghdad, they pulled a phone off a dead man's body. The screen was cracked. The battery was almost gone. It was a cheap handset, the kind of thing you could buy anywhere in the city for $10. And inside it was the entire architecture of the most dangerous terrorist organization on Earth. 70 raids, 6 weeks, one phone. The city was still burning when it was over. But the man who had lit the fire was dead in a field north of Baghdad. And the network he had spent 3 years building, the machine he had designed specifically to be impossible to dismantle, had come apart at every seam, simultaneously, all at once. He had built it too well, too connected, too dependent on the communications threads that held it together. The very strength of the network, its reach, its coordination, its connectivity, had become the thing that destroyed it, a phone. And 60 men who understood, better than anyone else alive at that moment, exactly what it meant.